Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch that has been provided by the Underground. Let's give them a round of applause. And again, of course, to Connor Moe, our saxophonist who serenaded us through lunch, who is a student in the Arts, Media, Performance, and Design faculty here at York University. Okay, so we are ready to begin our festivities, and apologies to those over here who might not be able to see as well, but there are some tables and spaces on this side, and people will be using the podium. So I have the pleasure of introducing you to three people who probably don't need an introduction, actually. We are really thrilled to have Alex Murray, Ted Spence, and Gerda Werkle here to offer their insights on the origins of the Faculty of Environmental Studies and the firsts and the innovative moments and elements of this faculty as they evolved more or less in the first 25 years. We're not holding them to it, but we're really looking forward to having them offer their perspectives. I'm going to ask Alex Murray to first come, and Alex is one of our original faculty members, so please join me in welcoming Alex Murray.
I'm pleased to see so many people here, and pleased for myself to be here. I'm a bit immobile because I had an encounter with the TTC at one of their doors. And I've always been a wonderful fan of the TTC, but I'm not so happy with them right now. But anyway, thank you. I arrived at York in 1962 because it seemed to offer a destination to a dedication to inter or trans curriculum, transdisciplinary curriculums, without existing academic silos. I came with 3 degrees in history, which allowed me to more possibility to approach complex issues with the 3 different, at least the real complexity that lay within those issues. Murray Ross, the first president who favored opening the silos, which was a common discussion around people at this time in the 60s among some groups of people. When I came to Glendon, that wonderful little college, I saw that a curriculum of subject matters, history and economics, politics, political science, sociology, psychology, geography, that these all created a kind of ground that could be pulled in together and to create programs in which the commonalities amongst these things and the differences could be used to create a program of urban studies. It was just kind of sitting there, and in fact the appointment of those faculty members in those courses was not an intention. They were each doing it for their own discipline, but suddenly putting all these together in one place, it made me realize that we could create a program that was interdisciplinary. Now, despite the opposition from some faculty members, and the interconnectedness of these subjects facilitated the creation of Canada's first urban studies program. And it was supported by a few faculty members, and particularly, again, the president. And I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time, so I became the coordinator of this program. And yet I really didn't, in some ways, have background in the cities, but I did. I had always been interested in urban issues and the interrelationship between agriculture and that sort of thing. I've done work on the anti-slavery movement in the United States, and the railroad, the Underground Railroad to Canada, and all of these things kind of sat there. And then I became involved with Frederick Law Olmsted, the great landscape architect, who was also very much involved in the anti-slavery movement. And I began to read everything that he wrote. And so I decided that we could produce a program. And fortunately, the Dean of Arts, John Sewell, let me go back a bit. Murray Ross and some of his advisors wanted to create a faculty of environmental design and attach it with a school of architecture. But they found out, and this was a kind of odd way of getting at things, they found out that Waterloo and Carleton had begun to work in this direction itself and to create programs. And so they realized they couldn't make a proposal to the province on a third program like that. So the Faculty of Arts Dean, John Saylorwell, urged me and the new Dean of Administrative Studies to create a proposal and a curriculum that was interdisciplinary, linking many subjects and creating them into environmental studies. We put together a program and presented it to the various authorities in the university, and President Ross was enthusiastic, as were the Senate and the Board of Governors. Ross began a search for a dean, and we were going to see how far we could go with it. He searched hard for a dean, and he got what he wanted, but not from the New York faculty. Why? Well, because I think there were no people in the university that had this attitude of quite this way, pulling these kinds of subject matters together and creating a program about them. And so it was unlikely that there would be a huge debate one way or the other if Murray Ross pushed this very hard, because people didn't have a position on it very much, whether pro or con. And there certainly were both kinds in the university, but they were not committed in very strong ways. And so the explanation is that is part of the reason why Jerry Carruthers was appointed, and there was only one person in the university who had some of these qualifications, and it was me. But I wasn't deemed material, certainly not at that point. And so Murray Ross continued his look for it. Another explanation of why Murray Ross identified Gerald Carruthers, he wanted a dean for the Faculty of Environmental Studies. He saw how he and Gerda Carruthers shared a lot of ideas. And Carruthers was an architect who had taught at universities in Manitoba, Toronto, and Pennsylvania, and done stellar research in Canada's Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation. He and President Ross agreed that it's in FES, things would not be in boxes. Carruthers had written, there will be no departments and no schools to act as boxes. The only box is the student's head. This was something he believed was to be in line with the interdisciplinary spirit of York. On the other hand, Carruthers was not naive about following the spirit of an institution, and he realized that, he had a wonderful phrase, that institutional spirits are best buttressed by written current guidelines to highlight and clarify what adherence that adherence to what they had adherence adheres to in the spirit. Crothers was the principal author of a publication classroom use of a wonderful phrase called a wonderful book called, and a lot of you will remember this with different reactions, FES essays into environmental studies, being interpretations and amplifications of the few curricula of the new curriculum model. And there was a lot of mixed reaction to this document, but students, it was accepted, and students received a copy when they registered. It was supposed to serve them as a guide throughout their years of study. First drafted in 1968, FES kit was regularly updated. The FES approach was based on connected concepts of environment and study. FES kit stated environment not only defines what is to be studied, but also indicates the way in which study may be pursued. Self-directed learning is fundamental in the process, and FES kit continued. Students enjoyed the freedom to create their own courses of study, and individual plans would be devised by students and their faculty members with various checking devices. There were no examinations of what the decisions the student made, but there were a number of various checking devices, but the basis was the product produced by the student and the faculty member. And Crothers' remark was that this arrangement of having monitoring as opposed to grading to see whether students were prepared to move on, it was time consuming, there was no question, but his argument was that it was more rigorous. Crothers recognized that FES had a flaky reputation for close to a decade. This went on back and forth with the faculty members and other departments getting involved, and it continued to be to go on. But much of the criticism of both FES kit and the faculty was focused on what was seen as Crothers' lack of clarity in his conception of environment and his decision to largely exclude science faculties from our department from the curriculum. But most FES faculty and students seemed to be content with it. They wanted to avoid the sort of compartmentalization that traditional science faculties represented, because that would have been a box too. Most students seem to be able to compensate for the near absence of traditional science in the faculty, and there is no doubt that fairly early on, many of the faculty members and students appreciated the flexibility of the curriculum and the freedom they enjoyed in shaping their own programs. A student from the mid-1970s, who I discovered in my research, expressed this enthusiasm quite eloquently. The faculty gave you the opportunity to look for yourself at things and for things. They weren't going to spoon-feed you. On balance, he remembered FES very positively. It was eclectic, innovative, diverse. They gave you rope, and you could make macrame or you could make a noose. I don't think any other faculty would have given me the same freedom, this student wrote. I'm going to stop now to give my colleagues an opportunity to share with you their experiences and perceptions of the time at York. I want to emphasize that all of us who have been associated with York as students, teaching faculty, and support staff should be aware of and grateful to two groups of people. The first of the people came from all sorts of backgrounds who in the late 1950s and 1960s had the foresight and imagination to see the need for a second Toronto University and the perception that it should draw on the best of the past and also respond to current demographic, social, technological, technical, industrial, scientific, intellectual developments. These pioneers did not all agree on what the new university should emphasize, but as a result of much debate and discussion, some transdisciplinary programs and curriculums became acceptable to the new university's advocates and supporters, and FES was one of them. The second group of people we should praise and celebrate and be grateful for is the early faculty, be they the very junior or the very most senior people who worked, even fought hard for the transdisciplinary curriculum that we're so proud of. Thank you.
I'm not sure what to make of that rope being macrame or a noose, but we're going to continue on with our next speaker, Ted Spence.
Well, thank you, Alice. I appreciate the opportunity to have a very few minutes to reflect on what you said, the first 25 years of the faculty. I have to declare, first of all, I wasn't here for the whole first 25 years. Of course, the first students arrived in 1969. I arrived at York in 1970, and by 1974, Jerry Carruthers had me cross-appointed from the Department of Geography to FES, and the rest is history. I was full-time in FES from 1982 on when I came over as the third dean of the faculty. In getting ready to talk today, I looked at lots of different papers, but three things in particular that are really important, I think, were really important to me, and the most important for all of us is this book, the 5 Decades of FES at York, which was written by David Morley and Tim Leduc. And I have to recommend the first chapter especially because it's the chapter that sets out what happened when everything that Alex just talked about was taking place. When Jerry came, when Alex joined him, along with the other 7 original faculty members that included Dan Kaplan and David Morley, and I've got the names here somewhere, but it's really worth having a look at. And it traces the faculty right the way through, and Tim gives the kind of overview of environmental studies in Canada, and David gives his perspective on FES. But the first chapter, I've never experienced anything like it in terms of understanding where FES came from. Then in 84, we produced something called a biennial review soon after I became dean, and it's a kind of snapshot of where we were. We actually produced it for the rest of the universities to try to help them figure out what FES was really all about, because there's so many exciting things that happened in the years before that while Roger was dean with our curriculum and other things that were happening. And it's really interesting to look back at it. And then in the 1990s, while David Bell was dean, at 25 years, the faculty produced something called ECHO, 25 Years at the Faculty of Environmental Studies. And I must say those 3 documents give you such a perspective on this incredible place that we've all had the pleasure to be part of. Alex was talking about Jerry as the first dean. I mean, it was just incredible what Jerry accomplished. He started out with 8 faculty members and 16 students in 1969. They registered in geography because they didn't have the license to register them directly in the faculty at that time. He saw the faculty through to 1976 when there were 32 faculty members and 250 students. And interesting enough, that was just about the steady state size of the faculty for the next 18 years until the BES and PhD came along. There were lots of turnover, but Jerry took it from 8 to 250 students, and the rest of us more or less managed a program of 250 students. Jerry was always, I guess it was his architectural skill. He could see the big picture and he could do the details. And so when he set up the faculty, and especially the MES program, because we had only one program, he had the big picture of what he wanted, and that's what Alex has described, and he had the details, which was how you did it, which was the rules and regulations, and especially the plan of study. It was the plan of study that let every student have their individual program. It was the plan of study that meant that every student in our classes had different objectives and was graded against a different scale. It was the plan of study that let somebody take a course for 6 credits and somebody else took it for 3. It was an unbelievable system that he created. Area of concentration components, learning objectives, learning activities, an advising system where every student had 2 faculty members as advisors. And that meant for us as advisors, we were learning all the time, not just from our colleagues, but also from the students. It was incredible. I said I was a student from the day I got to FES. I never stopped being a student here. I always said at York I learned something every day, and mostly it was fun. And that was never more true than in my years in FES. So Jerry's system was incredible. It was different than anything else in the university, and I guess that sort of brought us to lots of issues that we had to face because no one else understood us. Roger Schwaz, who's down front here, was dean from 76 to 82 after Jerry. He inherited a period of really difficult financial constraints, hardly any new appointments, but there were tremendous strides made in curricular innovations while Roger was dean, and also initiation of a wide range of international linkages, which we carried on while I was dean in the next 10 years. We strengthened other linkages. And then eventually David Bell, when he became dean, we handed him an approved program for a BES and a PhD, and I said goodbye, and he had the pleasure of having to implement those 2 incredible programs and also start the new Center for Applied Sustainability, and that was in the early 90s. I want to just touch quickly on a couple of themes. The one is, where was FES in York? And Alex sort of started that. We didn't fit. FES didn't fit very well. People didn't understand us. But Murray Ross had the vision to make us a faculty. And because we were a faculty, we didn't have anybody else's faculty council to worry about. We didn't have any votes from those closed-minded departments over there that would have blocked everything that Jerry wanted to do. We had our own faculty council. We did our own approvals, and it made a huge difference. But for the small number of faculty in FES, it also came with obligations and pressures, because we had to represent the faculty, like a faculty, at the Faculty of Graduate Studies and especially in the Senate of the university. So we had guaranteed seats all over the place, and over in the Faculty of Arts they had 15 departments to spread that workload over. It was all on the faculty members in FES, and it still is for a relatively small faculty. But it's very, very important because it's those members of the faculty that get out there in the university. They learn about the university, and every time they go to a committee meeting, somebody else learned about FES. And that was so important to gain that kind of understanding. We certainly had our problems because we were a small faculty. We always had conflicts with the Faculty of Graduate Studies, especially about admissions. I can't tell you how many times I went to their committees about some special case admission. The first 3 deans of the faculty actually were also the graduate program director. And one of the reasons we did that was because we could get right in their face, and they had to listen to us and accept that we were different, but we really were legitimate. It was an ongoing battle. At least on 2 occasions, we had problems with the president's office, where the presidents were skeptical about what FES was and what we were doing, and we had to push back. But mostly we did it by telling people what we were doing because it was so distinctive. And then when the 1990s came along, we started the BES and the PhD and sort of fulfilled the full faculty model. And that made a big difference, I think, in terms of the acceptability across the university. But every member of the faculty had a role to play in getting that message out as to why we were a legitimate part of the university and why what we were doing was really not only different, but really worthwhile. The curriculum of the faculty evolved on the basis of who the students were and who the faculty were and who the faculty groups were and who the clusters were, and it was always changing. The most distinctive thing about the faculty was the mix of theory and praxis. Many of the faculty members had practitioner experience before they came to FES, and many of the others also had traditional academic backgrounds. And they worked together, and they learned together, and the students worked with them, and we worked as a team, and every program was different. In Roger's years, and at the end of Jerry Crothers' period of time, there were all sorts of really interesting faculty clusters developed that were both research and teaching. Organizational change and action learning, which involved Roger and David Morley and Eric Trist. Quality of working life with Hominuk and Trist. Human service organizations with Morley and Rower. Cooperative futures with Chevalier and Craig. Native Canadian relations, way back then, with Hominuk and Mary Bernard, actually, who's here today, from out west, and a whole range of international development studies. Those things all kind of exploded in the faculty. Every one of those areas had faculty members, graduate students, and outside organizations working together. Unlike anywhere else in the university where there was the university and there was the community, we were always connected. And those are just a few of the areas. I know Gerda's going to talk about women and environments. I'm not going to mention that because I'm going to leave it for her. I can't take all of her thunder. But it was in there first. I mean, it was in there in the earlier years before, well, Jerry was still the dean. Later, when I became dean, we really built on all those areas, and we strengthened our links with law and administrative studies at that time, and we really reached out to the rest of the university. We made closer friends with arts and science and business and law, and we got teaching assistantships all over the university for our students. We were finally able to support them better, and things moved on from there. And then, of course, our next biggest innovation was to introduce the BES and the PhD in the early 90s. And we replayed everything that Jerry went through in the 60s, because I'm going to get cut off here. And you didn't do enough, Alex. You promised you were going to. Because Paul Wilkinson and David Morley really led the effort on the PhD, and the whole challenge was to create a proposal that had enough structure and that had fields in it that the Ontario Council of Graduate Studies and the York University Senate would approve, but that didn't give up on the flexibility and the interdisciplinary perspectives that we valued so much. And just like Jerry did it in the 60s, we did it again in the 90s. We got a program through that essentially lets our students do what they want to do. And it worked again, and we fooled them again. So that's really my perspective on curriculum evolution. Another area that I really can't not mention is the international projects that the faculty engaged in and still engages in. I mean, it goes right from the 70s. My experience went right from the 70s through well into the 90s, all sorts of major initiatives that I was part of and others were. We had both individual faculty members involved internationally and the faculty level projects as well. At the individual level, Howard Doherty was working in Central America way back in the early 70s, and it eventually led to Las Nubes. Morley and Wilkinson were working in the Caribbean. Chevalier, Craig, and Carruthers were working in Tanzania with action research. Later years, individuals were working on other parts of Latin America, India, Africa. And then at the faculty level, building particularly on the linkages and contacts that individual faculty members had made, and particularly that Roger had while he was dean of the faculty and afterwards, we were able to really break out at the major international project level, so that FES became the most important part of York University in terms of our international reach by the late 80s. Let me just touch quickly on 3 areas. In 1986, the United Nations approached us to become the home of the United Nations Center for Human Settlements Information Office for North America and the Caribbean. And for 3 years, we actually had a United Nations office in the faculty with permanent UN staff on site. Kenya was kind of the initial. York was in Kenya for a long time. There was a big training program in Kenya in the early 70s, but beginning in 76, the Kenyan connection for York University was the Faculty of Environmental Studies. It started with the creation of an environmental studies program at the University of Nairobi. Jerry Carruthers went out there as soon as he was finished as dean. He spent 2 years in Nairobi, followed by Rob McDonald, Stuart Marwick, Tim Cartwright, and all sorts of other faculty members who were engaged in that program. Because of the work we did at the University of Nairobi, and particularly that Rob McDonald did, it spun off after that into a partnership that the faculty had with Ontario Hydro and the Ontario Ministry of Energy. Here's this tiny faculty working on an equal partnership basis with Hydro and the Ministry of Energy, and we worked with all the energy sectors in Kenya. Rob McDonald went out there and ran that project for several years. Peter Victor was there as an advisor for several years. And the Kenya-Canada Energy Advisory Project was a huge endeavor from 84 until 92 and offered opportunities for FES to really kind of become very visible in the environmental field internationally. After that project, Rob McDonald went back to the University of Nairobi and had a project again through until 93 with the Department of Urban and Regional Planning there. For 16 years from 1986, we had a really big involvement in Indonesia. And I think it was maybe the ultimate project, and it came directly out of work that Roger did as a consultant immediately after he finished his deanship. We were partnered with. It was a project where we partnered with the University of Waterloo and worked through Dalhousie University. They had the big funding, but we got a big chunk of it. And we worked with 3 universities in Java, and then in a second stage with 4 universities in Sulawesi. And the most important thing was faculty members from those universities came here to do degrees. Senior research people of their staff came here to do degrees. Our students got attachments there. And many, many of our faculty members had opportunities to teach courses there. The project was really led in its early stages by people like Bill Found, who's here today, and Bonnie Cattell, and that's basically it. At another stage, we were there for 16 years in Indonesia. It was followed by 13 years, or at the same time we had a 13-year attachment in Thailand, but it didn't have nearly as much impact. The Indonesian project brought so many students here. So let me just finish by saying, as I said a few minutes ago, at York, I always learned something every day, and mostly I had fun, and that was never more true than here in the faculty. I have to say that the work I did in the faculty, I was so lucky to have such a strong group of people supporting me and working with me, the associate deans and the senior staff. I mean, many of them are here today, like Paul Wilkinson and Anita McBride and Anna Bozelli's here. These were all people who I depended on every day. And I must say, as I said, when you came to FES as a faculty member, you became a student here. You learned something all the time. And the thing about the faculty is we all exchange stuff all the time. I mean, I would never have been able to do what I did after the faculty, including go over and work in the president's office and have a lot to do with bringing the subway to York, if it hadn't been for my experience in FES. I mean, in FES, I rediscovered my urban interests. Jerry even got me to be a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners and OPPI, something I would never have imagined. I came to the faculty to teach water resources originally. I ended up working on the subway project. So it was quite amazing the experience that I had here and the help I was then able to give the faculty later when we got David Morley in here as dean to help save the faculty at a time when the statistics were so bad that Lorna Marston was asking questions. At least she was doing it on an evidence-based situation. The earlier questions we had from the president was just misunderstanding. Anyway, I've got to say thank you for letting me reflect a little bit on some of these things, and I have to say thank you to FES for having given me the opportunity to grow so much, and I think to help the faculty evolve over those first 25 years. So thank you. And find the book. I'm sorry. Is that okay?
Thank you, Ted. I will now call upon Gerda Werkle to offer her insights on FES's first 25 years.
Thanks. I'm not going to go into 25. It's looking back and some of the firsts that I can remember. I started my full-time job at FES on July 1st, 1972 as an urban sociologist specializing in housing, and I ended up working a lot with Alex Murray here, who was doing work on housing. My first contact with FES was a graduation of some of the first graduates of the MES program. The ceremony was held at John Bosley's parents' house. Now, Bosley was an MES student who subsequently became Speaker of the House of Parliament for the Conservatives. The graduation was wacky. There were just a few students. There were costumes. People were hit on the shoulder with a fake sword, and there were lots of jokes. I didn't know what to think. It's my first. It was really unheard of at York, as we've heard, and at most other universities at that time, to create a new academic unit with such a diverse faculty. There were several architects and planners. Jerry Carruthers was one of them. We had a psychiatrist, Dan Capon, who did work on health and cities. We had specialists in international development, Jean-Marc Chacroun and others, a geographer, David Morley, a physicist who focused on energy, Rob McDonald, a psychologist who was a pioneer in environmental psychology, Becky Peterson, two sociologists, Tom Philbrook and I, an urban historian, Alex Murray, a naturalist, John Livingston, who also worked on Canada's North and who was the voice of the CBC on nature programs. We had several political scientists. Bill Lease, who led the way on issues of the Conservative Society, Graham Beekest, who focused on environmental politics, Steve Klein, who emphasized communications. Several faculty focused on organizational change and innovation. Michelle Chevalier, Eric Trist, David Morley, and others. Jack Craig from sociology was an expert on nonprofit organizations. Alan Rohrer came to work on the mentally disabled and other organizational issues, and some of you may know that he died in an airplane fire, which resulted in those regulations about no smoking on airplanes. He was coming back from a conference. Diane Marino was an MES grad, so she was a student. And then she became a faculty member and started community arts, followed by Deb Barnt. Faculty from unrelated backgrounds were teamed up, sometimes against our will, I have to say, to advise students on plans of study. It meant that faculty had to learn what it meant to support student-centered learning, something we'd never heard of before or experienced ourselves in many cases, and to work across disciplines. We were required, really required, to develop interdisciplinary courses, some of them with 10 faculty members in them. These included one of the first university-based courses that was an introduction to environment and behavior. The first course on women and environments at any university, as far as I know. There were courses on women and planning at Columbia and at MIT, but not on women and environments. The journal, the magazine Women and Environments, which still exists, had its genesis in a panel at the UN Conference on Human Settlements in 1976 that was organized by Becky Peterson, David Morley, and me. This magazine was founded in FES as a newsletter to keep people informed, and we mimeographed it, sent it all over the world. Planning was really writ large in FES. It had a lot of faculty and a lot of students in the MES program, but it was different from planning anywhere else. It emphasized environmental, social, international aspects, and planners were often strongly encouraged to take courses outside planning. There was a block of students that formed around communications and environment, another around environmental art. Environmental impact assessment was identified very early as an important field by planners Reg Lang and Audrey Armour. Paul Wilkinson attracted students working on recreation and environment. Howard Daugherty taught tropical ecology and later founded Las Nubes in Costa Rica after he met someone when he was in the hospital, right? Someone who owned a piece of land in Costa Rica. I guess Howard was bored and needed somebody to talk to. Urban and related fields of planning always attracted a large contingent of master's students who wanted to move beyond a technical approach. The MES program distinguished itself from the rest of the university by hiring practitioners to teach experiential workshops. For example, Ellie Comey, a former director of planning in Chicago and in Toronto, taught our students for many, many years in FES. Jack Diamond, still an architect in Toronto, taught workshops in the FES. From the start, FES encouraged students to do field experience with practitioners and organizations, and they got credit for this. This was before the term internship became popular. We called it field experience. Maybe we have to change the term. Now, often this led to full-time jobs, often before they graduated, so they didn't graduate, or a total change in their plan of study. They would come back from these field experiences and said, I learned about something totally different. I want to start all over again. For both faculty and students, the first 10 years of FES were very demanding. They were chaotic. They were full of energy as new courses were created, rethought, and sometimes abandoned. Students often led the way, forming group independent studies that created pressure to hire new faculty. For example, in food studies, that took a while. So I had students meeting in my living room doing a reading group on food studies for a few years before we hired a faculty member. Health and environments was another area, environments of the North. If we were to trace back to the first years of FES, we would find the seeds of what we now consider innovative and important fields of study and policy. Now, I started thinking back to all of these people, and I realized, and this is going to be a downer, I'm sorry, at least 14 faculty that I can remember have died. So let me just read their names. Dan Kappen, Ellie Comey, Michelle Chevalier, Jerry Daly, Howard Daugherty, Jack Ellis, Michael Huff, Reg Lang, John Livingston, Diane Marino, David Morley, John Page, Alan Rohrer, and David Bell. And there may be a few more that I haven't remembered. because we had people from the very beginning who were not new faculty like me. They were experienced faculty members. A lot of them are no longer with us, but I realized in seeing many of the graduates of FES that many of you were students of these people who are no longer with us. And they contributed a great deal to the kind of place that FES was initially and still is, and is still emerging. Because some of the areas that I listed, we don't, so, thank you.
I'm really struck by what happens when you bring passionate people together with their innovative ideas and their diversity, and what it is that you can pull together when you have people who are brave and courageous in light of institutional norms and willing to push the boundaries around what we consider legitimate knowledge, what we consider legitimate topics, and how we want to work towards a pedagogy and research excellence that reflects who we are. Please join me in thanking Gerda Werkle, Ted Spence, and Alex Murray for their contributions and their insights today.